Hi, so my name's John Cordy and I'm a Helix user and Ajax Stomp user and PodGo user. Now this video I've been asked to make about kind of some of the cool things that I'm able to do with Helix Native, so it's a sponsored video, but I thought it might be slightly interesting anyway. And the reason for making it is because I think Line 6 are giving away Helix Native with any Helix LT, Helix Floor and Helix Rack purchases over the next sort of month or two until like the end of January. So they kind of wanted to let people know about that, and so I guess given that I'm a Helix person, I can tell you. And so here's my digital audio workstation. This morning I've been recording with the Helix plugged in via USB, and one of the cool things about that is that you can basically get yourself.
Today we're going into the infinite.
The first thing to say is, so sometimes when I go to record a track, I might find that I've ended up using too much delay or something on the guitar part. Now if I've just done a bog standard recording out with some jacks or anything like that without doing a DI, I'm basically stuck with whatever that sound is. So for instance, that's the sound I've got there, and there's some delay on it. So the issue with this is that if you're recording for a project or anything, you're basically stuck with whatever sound that you used. And that can be kind of negative if you've got a really great take, but you end up finding out that at certain places there's too much delay, or the delay starts to overwhelm things. This is something that I experience fairly often, being that I like delay. So when you're sat over a recording, you don't necessarily notice that the delay is as prominent as it is, and particularly this stereo imager kind of can bring out some of that delay. So the thing is that when you record using the USB of the Helix, you can send out the normal outputs, but also on output 7 of the Helix, if you're using it as an audio interface, sends just a clean guitar signal. And what that means is that you can then open up an instance of Helix Native, use whatever tones you are actually using on your Helix, and then make adjustments from there. So that's kind of super powerful, and that means that you could potentially save a take by reducing the delay on it. For instance, I've got exactly the same take here, or I could use completely different sounds if I wanted to as well. So that's the standard sound, and I can reduce the delay mix so I could get more clarity on the part. So that's one way to make use of Helix Native, even if you've got a full floor. The other kind of good thing about this is that I've got kind of automatic DIs of everything that I've got recorded. So recently I recorded with Mark Kelly from Marillion on the Marathon, Mark Kelly's Marathon album, and I was actually recording with the Kemper with that, but I was recording with my Helix tones that I've profiled with the Kemper, specifically because I can send a DI out into my audio interface. I use an audio interface, a Steinberg UR-RT4, specifically because I use lots of different devices, so for me it's important to have a hub which I plug kind of things into, and so I might use the Strymon Iridium, the Kemper, a Mesa Boogie amp or whatever, so that's why I do it this way. But I think it's really useful to be able to manipulate DI tracks and to automatically send them out. So if you've only got a Helix LT, Helix Rack or whatever, and you've now got Helix Native free as well with that, I think that's a really useful tool. And recording DI is sort of expected, I think, now if you do any kind of projects with producers and stuff, so that they can do what they want with your sound. Another way is, so I do quite a lot of looping and freezing stuff, and you find that sometimes you need the loop kind of loud to be able to hear it, otherwise it's very difficult to kind of stay in time and in sync with it. But then when you come to listen back to what you've just recorded, sometimes the guitar part, the main guitar part, is kind of lost in the mix a little bit and gets overwhelmed by the loop. There's a dog getting involved. So the thing about recording with this DI again is that you can do the same kind of principle as before. Because it's a DI, it doesn't record the looping part, so you've just got an instance of just the guitar part that you played, which is really useful. So I'll just show you here. So I've got control of just the guitar part here. You can hear a little bit in the background of the other stuff just because of the way that I solo things. But I can effectively turn down the loop and turn up the main guitar part if I choose. So that's a really useful way to potentially save and a take that otherwise would have been rendered useless because of a loud kind of loop volume, if that makes sense. So again, just all I'm doing is I've got the DI recorded alongside my main performance, and I'm using an instance of Helix Native to reamp that, and it's kind of instant, which is cool. And then I can control the volume of this line completely independently. I think that's a really useful way to use Helix Native as well. The kind of one other thing that I've been doing with it, specifically on this track actually, I'm running Helix Native alongside a harp sound here. You may not be able to hear it terribly well, but so what I've got going on, if I mute that, what I've done is gone into Helix Native, and I'm actually using one of the artist presets, the bulb ambient preset, just to add even more of a wash to this and make it kind of synthy. And that's a really kind of interesting way to get more out of Helix Native if you're kind of, you know, doing production stuff, and you might be more familiar with how kind of guitar effects work and how they're kind of labeled and stuff than you are with other bits and pieces. So I think that's kind of a useful way to kind of start doing some production stuff with other sounds. So if you use like synths and bits and pieces through a guitar sound, or harps even, or lots of stuff, there's lots of stuff to experiment with, but you find some really kind of surprising cool tones. Even vocals you could chuck through some guitar effects and get some decent things out of that. So that's another thing you could do, you know, if you're using an HX Stomp and you've only got enough for your normal kind of tone, you can use Helix Native to essentially give you another set of DSP, or 2 sets of DSP, so you can build up tones in that way. I also wanted to show you one last thing that I've done. The very last thing that I've done is that I had the Fender Champ, and what I've been doing with that, I've profiled it with a Kemper, and that got really close to the tone in the room, and then I was kind of doing a comparison with my actual Helix tone, because I've also made a Helix tone with the Champ. And what I've done is I've come away from the guitar, and I've got the same take recorded, DI, so I've recorded DI out of the Kemper, like I've said I've done with the project before, but you could equally have done this with a Helix or something. The principle that I'm trying to show you here is that I'm using Helix Native to kind of tone match stuff, and so you can here's so that's the Kemper. So if I just show you, this was the preset that I made before I'd gone through this process. So before I've tried to sort of sit down and really tone match it. So that was my Champ sound, and now here's my recent one. And what it's enabled me to do is to get deeper into the kind of whatever's going on here, and kind of make some more sensible decisions about, you know, how the thing's actually sounding, whether it needed more presence, whether I needed to move the mic in closer, maybe I needed to try a few different mics, maybe it had more reverb on the original recording. But all of these things, chances are if I was just sat with the Helix doing it, I wouldn't have gone this in depth, and I don't think I'd have ended up with a preset quite as cool as this one. No, it's not exactly. Still not exactly the same, like the Kemper one's a bit more compressed and stuff. but I think it's kind of way closer than I was able to get without doing this process. So those are just some of the ways that I think I'm going to continue to use native. I think, you know, if I was going into a big project again, I certainly would consider, I definitely want to DI everything anyway, so whether I track with the Kemper or whatever, I think I definitely want to keep a DI of everything, so that's something to bear in mind. You can do that with the Helix very easily, recording via USB, and it sends out a DI on track 7. So just another little thing that you could maybe experiment doing, you know, if you're mixing other stuff, you can still use Helix Native for other bits and pieces, and if you're used to kind of tweaking in a guitar environment, I think maybe you find that you've got some familiar things that you can do more so with Helix than you might with other devices or other plugins. And the other thing is that midway through a project, for instance, you might find that you've found a lead preset that works way better than what you'd already recorded takes with. And so if you've got DIs and Helix Native, you can go back, and before the project is delivered, you can go back and make those changes back across the project. So I think it's kind of just really nice in that way to be able to do that and be that flexible with stuff. Thank you for watching. Hopefully that was vaguely interesting. And yeah, that's how I would use Helix Native. Cheers.